Hey, team. Welcome back to another episode of the Jenn Commandments podcast. I am your host, Jenn Wien. I'm an engineer currently working in Wisconsin. I grew up in the Chicagoland area and I went to college in Michigan. Hey, it's time. It's time. We're going to talk about Little Women. We're talking about the film adaptation, Greta Gerwig's Little Women. We're just gonna get right into it. I'm not gonna talk about my life or anything. There's a lot to discuss, so I just want to get right into it. I will be reading from a script most of the time. Just a little fair warning. And yeah, I may veer off. I have some notes and in addition to the script, and yeah. So let's get into it. So, Greta Gerwig's Little Women is not just a faithful period adaptation. It's also a meta narrative that reflects on the act of storytelling itself. The film shifts not linearly between past and present, allowing the audience to see the contrast between youthful idealism and adult reality. By doing so, Gerwig highlights the process of becoming, both as a woman and as an artist. So, the movie is we get snippets as if you are the adult person living in the reality, and situations that are relevant to the current moment. We have flashbacks for each of the Little Women, and it's sort of told as if, yeah, you are living in as that girl and you're remembering a moment in time because of what's happening around you. And I think that's a beautiful thing that Greta did masterfully. The first watch or two, I there were times where I was a little confused of like, where are we? But now that I know this timeline, like I do think that something like Little Women is created for fans of the book or fans of literature. So I think a lot of people may go into Little Women already having known the timeline and having known the characters intimately, you know? So I think that could have gone into consideration as well, you know. It could have been my fault, you know. So some of the major themes is the next section that I sort of got into. So a central theme in Greta Gerwig's adaptation is the power of authorship, especially for women. So Jo March is sort of the main protagonist, and her journey is not just one of self discovery, but also of asserting her creative and economic independence. In the final scenes where Jo negotiates the rights to her novel symbolize her reclaiming of narrative agency, a powerful feminist statement. And then we have a quote from the movie. If I'm going to sell my heroin into marriage for money, I might as well get some of it. And this is in reference to at the beginning of the movie, the the main dude who's the guy who sells books or whatever, who, you know, like, I don't know who you send it to, an agent or something, I don't know, whoever you send your work to, whether it be for newspapers or novels, whatever. um he told her that if you're going to have a woman protagonist, she has to either be married or dead by the end of it, because those are the only women's stories that matter. Mind you, this is in theory, not in theory, it does take place during Civil War America. But however, just take that with what you will. Gerwig also blurs the lines between Jo and Louisa May Alcott, creating a meta commentary on how women's stories are shaped, commodified, or compromised. The second theme that I will be discussing is love and independence. Each of the March sisters navigates love differently. And I think the first few times I watched it, I understood what the message was telling me, but I was still so joeing about it, where I was like, uh yes, but like I'm still so we'll talk about it. The film presents multiple models of womanhood, challenging the idea that romantic love is the sole or highest goal for women. So Joe values independence and fears marriage as a loss of self. Like the first few times that I watched this movie, I had such a hard time relating or seeing womanhood aspiring or that kind of womanhood aspiring like Meg or even Amy promptly, even though Amy does love Laurie and I'm glad that they end up together, you know. It's just I'm like still he fucked up, you know. He didn't want you, I still feel that need to clench in, so Meg chooses domesticity, but it's shown as a valid conscious choice rather than a default. And this is addressed, we'll talk about it. So the sort of structure that I'm going to take for the analysis is we're sort of talking about our themes, and then we'll go through a conclusion for the themes, and then I'll talk about each individual character because I think the movie and likely the book, I would like to read it, but my focus right now is Hunger Games, the Hunger Games series. um is I would love to read it, but one of the I think the reason why it is so impactful is because these characters are so well developed, and because they are real, like the story tells it as these are real people, because they are. So we'll go through each character too. Yeah, I'm so excited to be talking about this. Okay. Anyway, so Amy initially appears materialistic, but her character matures into someone who understands her worth and desires both love and ambition. And I understand Amy and her want to, well, they have to be wealthy. That is one of the requirements. Love is secondary, you know. I get that. And especially in a time period of that, And then finally Beth represents selflessness and quiet strength, embodying the spiritual and emotional heart of the family. The next theme is sisterhood and female solidarity, and I would argue intersectionality in feminism and female solidarity, of like womanhood looks different and each and every one of those paths are valid, yeah. And we'll get into that. We'll get into that when we talk about Meg. I'm excited. So the bond between the March sisters is the emotional core of the story. Despite their conflicts and their differing worldviews, the film emphasizes loyalty, support, and growth. The flashback structure heightens the poignancy of these relationships by showing us their evolution over time. So, sorry, I needed my computer up on my lap. But I love this portrayal of sisterhood because they like it says each sister is so vastly different at how they approach the cards that they've been dealt, you know? Um and I I know that there were some weeks ago where I discussed how like each of those are deeply disappointing. I think that was in my first few watches of it where I was still like judging Meg a little bit, where like I was very in the Aunt March space. And we'll talk about Aunt March too. She's my favorite character, so we're going to talk about her last. But yeah, I think the way that womanhood is displayed in this movie is very intersectional. And I think that it's so interesting to show intersectionality in such a white way. Well, like e- it shows that intersectionality is not just between interracial or inter like between heteronormative and then the LGBT plus. Like intersectionality is, hey, I want to be a stay-at-home mom, or hey, I never want to get married ever in my whole goddamn life. Like it doesn't just mean DEI. We're all fighting the same things. And then the final theme that I wanted to talk about is the societal expectations and gender roles. So Gerwig sharply critiques the limited roles available to women in the 19th century. Aunt March, played by Meryl Streep, delivers biting truths about the transactional nature of marriage in a patriarchal society. Even Amy, often dismissed in other adaptations, is given depth as someone acutely aware of her economic vulnerability and the strategic nature of her decisions. And then a quote from Amy is, "Don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is." And she's I love this quote. This is one of my favorite moments in the movie, because this is where Amy she finally shows her cards to somebody, where this whole time she has been shown or thought to be just like this materialistic woman who just wants to be someone's, you know, be somebody's trophy wife, because she never experienced wealth in her childhood or whatever. She's telling she's actually telling Laurie about himself. Mind you, Laurie ends up going on to marry Amy, because Amy is the only person who is ever honest to Laurie about who he is and how he's acting with the great privilege that he's been dealt, you know. Um so I love this quote. "Don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is." Queen. Period. I love Amy. Amy's my favorite character. I root for her hardcore. I don't know if in the book that's the same. I read, like, I don't know, maybe a third of it when I want to say around like 7th or 8th grade. Um my aunt Amy actually got me a copy of it. She sent it to me for one of my birthdays or Christmas or something. So, I read a little bit when I was younger, but I couldn't keep my attention. My attention span wasn't ready for that. So, um, yeah. So, in conclusion, Greta Gerwig's Little Women is a deeply layered film that reclaims a classic text for a modern audience. It balances reverence for the original with bold reinterpretation, emphasizing themes of agency, authorship, and female identity. By framing the narrative as Joe's written creation, the film ultimately celebrates the power of storytelling, especially when women are the ones holding the pen. We love women. We love women. And especially for Louisa May. Let's see, when did Little Women come out? When did the book come out? One sec. This was in 1868. That was the first volume. It was in September. That's crazy. They let a woman write a book back then? That's crazy. Good for her. That's a trailblazer. Um So love that. Um Next we're going to get into our character analysis. The first character that we're going to talk about is Marmee, or Mrs. March. Now there's birds on the Um, Marmee is the girl's mom, and she's absent a lot because she's a volunteer for the union. She works locally to help, whether it be people who need blankets. She like goes and helps feed families in need, etc. Despite the fact that they themselves are not wealthy by any means, they are constantly extending for those who are worse off than them. So Marmee, portrayed with grace and quiet strength by Laura Dern, is the moral and emotional anchor of the March family. She embodies compassion, patience, and positive values. However, unlike in some earlier versions where she appears most almost saint-like, Gerwig's Marmee is allowed to show vulnerability and frustration. Well, I came up with a rough outline and I said to ChatGPT, I said, clean this up. And it did. So it talks about other adaptations, and I'm like, I ain't seen those, so I'm gonna just have to take your word for it. But uh okay, so it says her quote here is, "I'm angry nearly every day of my life," and she says this to Joe. Now, this is after an incident where Amy did something to Joe that was very detrimental. I'm not going to give it away because I want you to go watch it. But Amy does some crazy shit, and it takes Joe until something almost catastrophic happens to Amy for her to drop it. And it's not Joe's fault that this almost catastrophic thing happened, but it's certainly not her fault either. So, of course, Joe feels terrible, and she's like, I don't know how I get so mean. I could watch anyone suffer and I'd love that shit. And Marmee is like, yeah, girl, I totally fucking get it. Um, and I think part of that part of the movie was really healing for me because um I had always felt that all of my bad traits and bad qualities inherently just like had to come from my father, and therefore I had a lot of shame surrounding that because in the majority of my life's narrative, and mostly for my current narrative too, um my father is like a very negative thing, right? And I realized that my mom could have been just as like spicy as I am, and like maybe she's been like sort of beaten into submission, and maybe just because I'm more outspoken doesn't mean I'm inherently like worse than she is, at even just like being a woman, or just like yeah, like I don't know. I This movie, like, I've been on a big like femininity journey lately, and Little Women has been so integral to that. um so yeah, this line is pivotal. It reveals that Marmee isn't just naturally kind and composed, but is consciously choosing to live by her values despite inner turmoil. She models emotional regulation and self sacrifice, not as effortless traits, but as difficult acts of love and resistance against a world that doesn't give women space for anger. And I know that I meant it or sound or okay. Restart. I know that I posed it as derogatory when I was talking about my mother just now. But I also know that she models emotional regulation and self-sacrifice not as an effortless trait, but as difficult acts of love and resistance against a world that doesn't give women space for anger. I know that there are times that I feel silenced as a woman. And so growing up in a society, having 35 or however older my mom is, years more shit thrown in your face of like conform, of course this is going to shape. Marmee is a very healing character because it does portray a lot of more traditional, if you have a very traditional parent system or had a very traditional parent system, you understand like this. you know um so the themes that I think that Marmee embodies is female anger and self-control. She teaches Jo to master her temper, not to suppress it, but to channel it constructively. And I've been doing a lot of self-reflecting lately, and I've been trying to work on, I know that a lot of the things that have been taught to me by women that I felt that were suppressing, that I felt as like suffocating almost, was meant out of love, and meant out of like this trying to teach you how to use it constructively or what have you. The next one is resilience and empathy. Her work with the poor and her moral clarity makes her a quiet revolutionary. One thing I do really enjoy about the marches is that they are quiet in their Jo isn't necessarily quiet about her activism, but I think sometimes activism has to be showboaty. I'm never for somebody who has high moral ground or like high moral, like a very specific moral compass, for them to be quiet about that shit. I think that's important, you know? But other than that, like they all hold their values very personal to them, and they show that in different ways. And Marmee teaches her children how to, and this final theme is motherhood as leadership. Marmee is not just a caretaker, she's a political and emotional educator to her daughters. And then the kids at school, they, granted, they clowned Amy a little bit for the fact that like the marches love a cause, which just goes to show that like the wealthy, if they directly benefit from the marginalization, they don't, regardless if they think it's moral or not, they're not going to be in a hurry to stop it. Um, and that's another thing that Little Women brings up that I think is really interesting. I don't think I like put it in the template to discuss, but like I did write in my notes of like there is political commentary in here. I'm not going to highlight it. I'd like to discuss like the womanhood, then the healing side of that more than anything. But I do. If you would like to watch it from that lens, I think you could, and you could find political commentary very easily in there. You know. So that's Miss Marmee. Um, and next we're going to talk about Laurie. Theodore Laurie Lawrence, or Joe calls him Teddy. Laurie is a charming, privileged boy who becomes like family to the marches. Timothy Chalamet plays him with an emotional openness and sensitivity that makes him feel both romantic and fragile, which I love. Can I just say I love a fragile male, like a yearny male character, like, because yeah. And I think it is also socioeconomic commentary that, because the marches have to spend so much time worried about finding money, that they don't really have the emotional space or the brain space to even really think about love as its own thing, right? And so I love that Gerwig comments on that by having Timothy Chalamet or Laurie be the emotional character, the sort of like emotion over logic character, you know. He's playful and passionate, but also immature in certain ways, especially when it comes to understanding Joe's independence. His deep bond with Joe is full of chemistry and friendship, but ultimately it's Amy who sees his potential and ways to for him to grow into the man that he needs to be, you know. This shift gives Laurie a more complete arc from infatuated boy to mature partner who wants the person who has ultimately one shown interest in him from the beginning, and two has never Amy has never once lied to. I might have already said it. I tried to record this episode once already, hated the way it was coming out with the notes that I had, made a template, put it into ChatGPT, and now this is my second go around of recording the episode. So now I don't really remember what I have said and what I haven't said. But anyway, I believe that Amy is the only character in the movie who is honest with Laurie about who he is and how he's being perceived to the outside world. Like I think everyone might just like hold his hand and like sugarcoat shit for him, you know? And like Amy's like, "Bitch, you look crazy right now." You know? And yeah, the quote that I have for him is, "I love her dearly, but I know I'll never be what she needs." And this is about Joe. I don't know, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with Amy and Laurie. I think that Amy still, despite her having an honest view of him, she she still wants him to be impressed by her. She still like she still wants his validation even though she knows his flaws, you know? And I think that's what love is. You know, that's all you could really hope for. Um and that's sweet. I'm such a fan of those two. But the themes for Laurie are unrequited love and growth. His journey shows how true affection sometimes means letting go. I think there is room for somebody being in your life to show you what it's like to fall in love with someone, and that being their role, you know, and that's beautiful. That's a beautiful role to have in someone's life. You know, I love Joe and his arc as well. I think it's perfect. And like I believe it to be right that they would have argued and they would have not liked each other. They would have regretted their decisions, you know. Emotional vulnerability in men is another theme. Laurie breaks masculine stereotypes and he weeps, he confesses, he loves without ego. He had to have known this. Laurie shows, you know, disorganized attachment. Just, you know, he wants Joe's affections, of course, because he knows that he doesn't have them. You know, of course, he does have them to a certain extent, but there's a part of him that knows that she loves her independence, you know? And I do think that, like we talked about, he's allowed to have that space because he's not worried about money. So he's like, okay, I can think about love. I have that whimsy to my that brain space, you know? And then the final theme is social class and connection. Though wealthy, Laurie feels more at home with the Marches than in his grandfather's world. It is shown throughout the movie that Laurie hates high society. And that's part of why Joe and he got along so well, because they both hated it. And I think the problem with that is, in long term, is that no matter how much Laurie hates it, he's already a part of it. He is wealthy. He can't escape the cards that he's been dealt, just as they can't escape theirs. Um and so he needs somebody who can fit in if they need to. And I just don't think Jo is. She's shown throughout the whole movie that I think that's her best quality, is that nobody can dull her shine. So next, we are going to be talking about Mr. Lawrence, which is Laurie's grandfather. Mr. Lawrence is a reserved and wealthy man who seems stern at first, but gradually reveals his deep tenderness, particularly through his bond with Beth, the youngest sister. His grief over the loss of his own daughter makes Beth's music a healing presence in his life. In one of the film's most loving or moving moments, loving could also be there too, he listens quietly to Beth playing the piano gifted to her, a nonverbal expression of profound gratitude and affection. He's sitting on the stairs, and you can see he's sitting on the stairs, but you can see her in the distance. It's a beautiful shot, and you can just see him sort of break down because he misses his daughter, but he's also grateful that Beth is there to fill the silence. That's one thing that the film really captures, is how much women fill otherwise very gloomy and dark spaces with just love and music and laughter. Little Women is it's a love note to women, and I think that's beautiful. So he doesn't have a quote because he don't really be talking a lot. His themes are grief and healing. His bond with Beth is about shared loss and the comfort of connection. Generosity and transformation. His initially rigid exterior softens, showing that love and kindness can reshape even the most stoic of hearts. And then intergenerational compassion. Through his relationships with both Laurie and the March family, Mr. Lawrence shows how different generations can support and learn from one another. There's this moment after Beth passes. I don't know if we've established that yet in the video, but Beth gets very, very ill and she passes. And this is devastating for everyone, of course, but especially Mr. Lawrence, because this is now two daughter-like figures for him that have passed. And he struggles immensely with trying to go into the March's house after. And there's this moment where Jo helps him. And it's very beautiful and touching that, when you're open to those moments with people younger than you and etc., you're opening yourself up to not only learning experiences, but kindness and comfort and vulnerability, like human vulnerability, And I think that's really beautiful. So these are sort of side-ish characters. They are secondary to the main four Little Women. The father is sort of a tertiary character. He only is in one or two scenes because he is frequently off at war, but he is seen as sort of the godlike figure in the household, where mother is often like, this is what your father would want you to do, etc., etc. So here's what these characters add. Marmee provides the emotional and moral framework for the March girls to grow within. Laurie shows how love and friendship can evolve, and that true maturity involves humility and self-reflection. And that Mr. Lawrence adds quiet depth to the story, representing the redemptive power of kindness across divides of gender, class, and age. Next, we're going to be discussing the March girls, our baby girls. I love them bad. Okay. So first, we're going to be talking about Meg. So Meg is the eldest March sister. She's gentle, romantic, and grounded. Um, she's played by Emma Watson. She dreams of a beautiful life but ultimately chooses love and simplicity over wealth and status. In earlier versions of the story, Meg can come off as the boring or traditional sister, but Gerwig gives her emotional depth and clarity of purpose. Her quote is, "Just because my dreams are different than yours doesn't mean they're unimportant." This line is Meg's thesis. She reminds Joe and the audience that feminism isn't one size fits all. Domesticity can also be a radical, conscious choice. And I'll be honest, the first couple times, like I said, the first couple times I watched this, I didn't get her. And I judged her, and I talked about in earlier episodes about how it just shows how deeply unsatisfying each version of womanhood is, but it also shows how beautiful and loving being a woman is. And I was being such a pessimist before, but I do believe that this is like, they show an arc for Meg that she is so happy in her life and she is so fulfilled by loving her husband. But like, I think that something that I have an issue with is I only want traditional for the women who are being treated like absolute gold by their men. You know, I don't believe in traditional for just any man. And so, and that means like very basic things, but you would be surprised at how many men don't fit those criteria, you know? And then like, yeah. Anyway, love Meg, and John is a man worthy of. Granted, they show that even if your initial reaction to something may not be the correct reaction, or like reaction, you can go back and make up for it later. And that goes for both sides. Like both Meg and John talked out of turn to one another a couple times, but they both made up for it, and they were able to come to an agreement about everything that they may have differing opinions on, you know. So the themes that Meg embody are freedom of choice. Meg chooses love and family, not because she has to, but because she wanted to. Class and aspiration. Her struggle between her modest life and dreams of luxury, like silk fabric that she covets from the shop, reflects the tension between fantasy and reality, and love over wealth. Her marriage to John Brooke shows that emotional wealth can be more fulfilling than material wealth. Next, we're going to talk about Miss Beth March. Beth is the shy, selfless, musically gifted sister, the emotional glue of the March family. She doesn't seek public recognition or grand dreams. Instead, she embodies quiet strength, humility, and kindness. In Gerwig's adaptation, Beth is more than a symbol, she's deeply humanized. Her death is not just tragic, it serves a moment of transformation of the family, especially Joe, who turns grief into creative power. In one scene, she says simply, "I don't mind," when offered something special, showing her nature that is of no drama. I think Beth is also she's a symbol for innocence. She's a symbol for the perfect woman, the good woman. And I think a lot of it is because she passed before society could wear her down, you know? And I know that that sounds morbid, but I think all of the girls express at one point or another throughout the film that Beth was the good sister. And she was. She quietly took care of all her chores. She loved music. She didn't bother anyone. She was a great woman. But I think given time to develop, she could have come up with some sort of agency on her womanhood as well. I just don't think that she was really given the chance. And so while the girls can chase the idea of her, I hope that, you know, they would also be steadfast in knowing that that's just like a image or whatever. The next theme is mortality and memory. Her illness and death confront the sisters, especially Jo, with the impermanence of life and the urgency of living and creating. And then her final theme is love through actions. Beth doesn't preach values. She lives them through small gestures and quiet service. Next, we're going to talk about Miss Amy March. Amy is the youngest. Oh, I didn't know Amy was the youngest. I thought Beth was the youngest. Maybe I just perceived her as younger because she was more quiet. Okay, sorry. Amy is the youngest and often the most misunderstood March sister. In this version, Gerwig redeems Amy from her long held reputation as spoiled and vain. Florence Pugh, our girl, gives her fierce intelligence, ambition, and emotional honesty. Amy knows she's not Jo. She can't be wild and what is this word? Iconoclastic. I didn't come up with that. I promise y'all. Let's hear that word said. That was loud as fuck. Characterized by attack on cherished belief or institutions. Amy knows she's not Jo. She can't be wild or iconoclastic, but she's not shallow. She has her own kind of power, and she refuses to apologize for using it. Her practical approach to love, art, and life is rooted in reality of being a woman in a world that values beauty and marriage above all else. She says, "I want to be great or nothing." This quote shows her drive, not for attention, but for excellence. And her speech to Laurie about marriage, that's, oh my God. I think we already talked about it. But Amy is telling him about himself, and she's eating. And she's eating down. Because don't even start to think that as a woman coming from poverty that it can't be a part of your decision making. The themes for Amy are ambition versus affection. Amy wants both success and love, and she works to get both without compromising who she is. Feminist realism. She's painfully aware of her societal constraints and plays the game strategically. That's something that I really admire about Amy. The first couple times that I watched it, I also didn't like her very much. But now she's my favorite because she simply understood the game of patriarchy and she's played it to her advantage. And I don't know why she would ever be demonized for that because it is society that placed those expectations on her to begin with. Now it's wrong because she's good at it. I just like don't understand, you know. Um and then growth and redemption. Her arc from the girl who burned Jo's manuscript to the woman who matures in Europe is one of the most satisfying arcs in the film. Like I said, that's my girl. Each sister is a valid version of womanhood, and the film doesn't elevate one over the other. I think it does a really good job of not glamorizing one life path over the other. And it does, we haven't talked about Jo yet, which is like the main protagonist. But they show the trials and tribulations of every single version of being a woman, and like the guilt and the shame that is sort of held with all versions really well. And I don't know, I don't know, I love this film. Y'all know that. So next we're going to talk about Jo. Jo is the second eldest March sister. a writer with a fierce independent streak, a boyish energy, and a deep aversion to the gender norms of her time. She's imaginative, temperamental, loving, and often torn between her desire for personal freedom and her need for connection. In Greta Gerwig's adaptation, Jo's arc is the most introspective and emotionally layered than ever before. She's not just the rebel or the tomboy, she's a woman coming to terms with a world not being built for her kind of spirit and fighting to claim space in it anyway. Boom, 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 boom. Her key quote is: women, they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts. And they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is all a woman is fit for. This monologue is the soul of Jo's character. It captures her internal conflict. She wants to be free, to live independently, to be taken seriously, but she also longs for love and intimacy. She's tired of having to choose between the two. I don't think I need to explain any more than that. If you get it, you get it. You know, Jo's themes, creative identity, and authorship. Jo is not only a writer, she is her writing. Her stories are extensions of herself, and writing is the tool she uses to understand and process the world. The film emphasizes her struggle to maintain artistic integrity in a male-dominated publishing world. They show they show her going through the fucking ringer at the publishing offices, dude. But it's so disappointing. The final scenes where she negotiates the rights to her book are incredibly symbolic. She isn't just selling a story, she's taking control of her own story. Gerwig blurs the lines between Jo and Louisa May Alcott here, turning Jo into a symbol of female creative agency. The next theme is independence versus love. Jo's central internal conflict is this: can she remain independent and still experience love and intimacy? If y'all ever find out, let me know. Her rejection of Laurie isn't out of cruelty. It's because she doesn't want to become somebody else's wife when she doesn't even know who she is yet. I can't love anyone as I love my liberty, she says. Still, she later admits to Marmee that she's so lonely, revealing her vulnerability and depth. Her loneliness doesn't negate her strength. It's what makes her human. And like we've discussed this on the pod, it's the world isn't created for women to try to have and lead independent lives. If a woman is in her 30s and single, she's seen as picky and she's seen as standards too high, and now she can't find anyone. And if a man is in his 30s and he's single and focusing on his career, he's like a bachelor, you know. Why is that? You know? And then the final theme is gender roles and resistance. Jo resists the world's attempts to define her. She cuts her hair, wears pants, writes stories with men in mind, all defiant acts of self definition. But her rebellion isn't simple or clean. She wrestles with guilt, confusion, and love along the way. She's not just the girl who simply doesn't care what anyone thinks. She does care, but she chooses herself anyway, even when it's hard. The If you listen to every time the fear of someone else's perception trickles into the back of your mind, I would never do anything. And for a few years, I didn't do anything because of that. And like, or not, not years, but there have been time periods where I'm like, So yeah. Now, we're going to go through Jo's relationships. She is the main character, so she's going to be a little bit more in depth. I know we still have to talk about Aunt March. She's the last one. So we're rounding third here, okay? Bear with me. So Jo's relationships we have with Laurie. I haven't talked a ton about their relationship yet, but it is central to the movie. They're best friends, and you can tell that Laurie always had romance in the back of his mind, but Jo was never interested. She actually resented that about him. Their friendship is deep and joyful, but their differences are fundamental. Joe sees marriage as a trap, and Laurie sees it as fulfillment. Their break isn't about rejection, it's about understanding what love means to each of them and respecting each other enough to know that it's different. Joe's relationship with Amy, in this version, Joe and Amy's relationship is much more balanced. Amy challenges Joe, not just as a sister, but as a creative equal. Their rivalry is framed as part of their struggle for recognition and respect, not just petty jealousy. There's a part at the end of the movie where Joe's saying something and Amy corrects her. And Joe goes, "When did you get so wise?" And Amy went, "I've always been this wise. You're just too busy noticing my flaws." And that's T-bitch. Joe's relationship with Beth. Beth is Joe's emotional compass. Her illness and death forced Joe to confront mortality, grief, and the meaning of life. Beth's passing is what ultimately grounds Joe's creative vision. Her death becomes the catalyst for Joe's authorship. There was a time where Joe was in a big creative rut. She had received some feedback from somebody she admired, and it wasn't positive, and she thought that she was untalented afterwards. And she finds it again after Beth's passing. And then Joe's relationship with Marmee is Joe's model of female strength, calm, wise, and emotionally resilient. Their conversations are where Joe lets her guard down, especially when she admits how hard it is to be independent in a world that doesn't reward women being independent. Love her. Joe's evolution. In Gerwig's ending, the film leaves Joe's romantic fate ambiguous, suggesting that the happy ending may be part of the story she wrote to please the publisher. This creates a meta ending where Joe, like Alcott, is able to sell a palatable ending while keeping her truth intact. I think it's a great ending. And I think it's a genius move. Very creative, so beautiful. My final take, or the final take on March, or Joe March, is that she's not just the protagonist of Little Women. She's a symbol of female creativity, inner conflict, and emotional honesty. Greta Gerwig's film gives her the space to be angry, soft, brilliant, lost, and empowered all at once. She's every woman who has ever wanted more and dared to try and go get it. And that's our girl. I love Joe, obviously. Part of me doesn't like Joe because I see a lot of myself in her. So I'm like, ugh, how exhausting, you know? But I love this movie. And the final person that we're going to be talking about today is Aunt March. So Aunt March is the wealthy, widowed great aunt of the March sisters. She's intimidating, opinionated, and often serves as a mouthpiece for the rigid social norms of the 19th century America. But in Greta Gerwig's adaptation, she's also revealed to be a shrewd, strategic woman, one who understands how the world works for and against women, and uses her limited tools, wealth, influence, and tradition to survive and maintain power. So her key quote is, "You should be thinking about your future. No one makes their own way. Not really. Least of all a woman. You'll need to marry well." This quote is Aunt March's worldview in a nutshell. Harsh, realistic, built from the hard-earned wisdom of surviving in a patriarchal society. She isn't trying to be cruel. She's trying to prepare the March girls for the real world as she sees it. It's so good. Oh my God. You have to watch it. So the themes for Aunt March are feminism versus survival. Aunt March isn't a feminist in the modern sense. She doesn't believe in overturning systems. Fuck all that. She believes in mastering them. Her views are shaped by a lifetime of observing that women have very few cards to play, so they must play them well. Her advice to Amy is to marry rich and marry smart. But that shit really isn't that romantic. It's rooted in genuine desire to protect her. She's the voice of realism in a story that's fueled by idealism. The second theme is power and class. Aunt March's wealth gives her a unique kind of freedom that other women lack. Sorry, my brain is automatically built to say whack. And she wields it carefully. She funds the family, dangles opportunities like the European trip in front of Amy and Joe's face as leverage, and then uses her position to influence the girls' choices. But even she is trapped in some ways. She's widowed, childless, and clinging to relevance through control. She knows exactly what class means in her world, and she's unapologetic about preserving it. She believes love is a luxury that only the rich can afford. That's one of the central themes of Aunt March. Oh, obviously we're talking about it, but um she's so only the rich can try to marry for love. Only the rich. A lot of ways I get that. I don't know. It's rough. It's rough. Um The final theme is intergenerational tension. Aunt March represents the older generation of women who conformed and endured so that the next generation might have choices. Her sharp critiques of Joe and Amy aren't just scolding, they're warnings from someone who sees how easily dreams can be crushed by reality. She's not just there to nurture, but she's there to make sure the girls are armed with practical knowledge. Aunt March's closest bond is with Amy, and for good reason. Amy is ambitious, polished, and socially intelligent, qualities Aunt March values. While Joe and Aunt March often clash, both being strong willed and idealistic in different ways, Amy is the one who listens, learns, and ultimately wins both Aunt March's favor and her inheritance. This dynamic is fascinating. Aunt March respects strategy and sees Amy as her intellectual successor. Aunt March, in the larger narrative, while she may seem like the antagonist at first glance, Aunt March actually serves as an important thematic role. Her function is the foil to Joe. She embodies realism where Joe represents idealism. Their friction forces Joe to define her values more clearly. There's a moment where Joe and Aunt March get into an argument because Joe's like, my father's right, but Aunt March is like, yes, it is possible to be right, but also foolish because your father left you guys basically high and dry just to help other kids, you know. Um, and that's like a fair critique, but also, this is a thing that radicalizes Joe. She goes, yes, but I would rather him do that and us suffer, you know. And she figures out that that's what she wants for her own life, you know. So the next role that she plays in the narrative is the catalyst for Amy. She invests in Amy. She enables her journey to Europe and leads Amy's artistic and emotional growth. Whether she's intentionally trying to help her emotional growth or not is another story, but I do think that she does. And then finally, she is the voice of harsh truths. She reminds the audience of the brutal economic and gender realities of this time. She's the necessary counterbalance to Marmee. Where Marmee is full of love, Aunt March is full of logic. Together, they represent two sides of the maternal coin, nurture versus nature, or navigating, or something. I don't know. My final thought on Miss Aunt March is she's not the villain. She's a survivor of her circumstance. Greta Gerwig treats her not only with sentimentality but respect. She's the woman who made peace with a rigged system and chose to beat it at its own game. Her legacy may not be warm, but it's lasting. And that shows through Aunt March leaving Joe her home and her turning it into a school. These are, regardless if Aunt March was an old mean hag, you know, she ultimately, something good came of her legacy and her fortune, you know, and the reason she made sure to keep on to that fortune in order to pass those things down to those girls. And regardless if she said it the way you thought she should, that's feminism. That's exactly what you could ever want from your predecessors, you know. So I don't know. This showed me a lot about how I truly felt about women and older women. Um and it made me respect older women's perspectives more and give them more grace and empathy, while also being realistic about their flaws, you know, and each other's forms of womanhood. I think that Little Women is the embodiment of the women experience, and I think Greta Gerwig does a job of showing it. That's my girl. um, but yeah, I love this movie, and it's it'll forever be one of my comfort movies. I am so grateful that I found it this year. It's helped me through some really important soul searching that I've had to do this year of what does womanhood look like to me, and how do I want to be perceived as a woman, and what stereotypes and what pieces of womanhood that have been prescribed to me do I accept and what do I reject. And I don't know, I think it's a journey that I think is worth going on. I hope that all women go on their own journeys with femininity. Um, and I hope that this is one of your catalysts. I hope that Little Women can inspire you too. So, yeah, this is probably, one of my favorite episodes. I love all of this. So, thank you for listening. I love you very much. Make sure that you drink some water, you wash your face, um, go out for a little walkie walk if you have some time. And yeah, I go to court on Tuesday. So prayers up for me. You might, by the time you listen to this, you might already know how court went. Gang, gang, you know? All right. Love you. Bye.